I think when people say they want to start creating content mindfully, they a lot of the time mean with more intent. Doing things with intention is so important in everyday life, and moving that into how you create content, I think is so cool and such a really neat new thing that people are doing. And when people say they want to bring mindfulness into their content creation or into their gaming, I'm excited to see what that means to them, but I do worry. I worry because there's a thing called buzzwords, and buzzwords are sort of like fads. They're something that come into style and then drop out again. And even if they do stay in style and they don't drop out of popularity, they can start to mean things that don't actually align with the actual meaning of the word. I'll use cozy gaming as an example. Now, before I do this, disclaimer. No, it's not all cozy gamers. No, it's not me saying that cozy gaming is bad. I am literally a cozy gamer. I would be considered that by so many people for the types of games that I play and the type of content that I try to create. What I am talking about specifically is cozy gamers that gear themselves towards how can I make the most content out of the most things and get the most views in this particular style of gaming without considering the effects that their actions are having on the world around them. So, cozy gamers that are toxically positive, which means overly positive, they don't want to talk about anything negative ever, or they are going to let you talk about your bad day, but, God forbid you talk about politics. And hey, if you want to have a no politics rule in your community, I can't tell you what to do or what not to do, but I can tell you for a matter of fact that I personally wouldn't engage with it, because I'm not saying that you have to talk about politics 24/7. I'm not saying you have to start the conversation. However, if someone brings up something in your chat, you shouldn't be afraid to discuss it, because without discussing it, you're essentially lying to your community. You're not giving them the full view of who they're putting their trust in. And you might say, well, that's on them to make that decision. And I can tell you right now, there are community members making that decision every damn day. They're looking at streams and going, no politics rule, I won't watch it. And if you're like, I don't care, I'm going to do my own thing. Honestly, my podcasts probably aren't for you then, because we do not align as content creators. And if you are out there trying to be a good person, being honest with yourself about being a good person, then I wish you nothing but the best. Getting back to the point, I'm really excited to see what happens. And I'm hoping something happens with it, even on a small scale, of gamers and content creators really falling into this new category of mindfulness, of mindful gaming, of mindful creating, because it's been something that I've been so passionate about for years, and I've never really taken the time to create a lasting document of it like I am with this podcast. I try to show that enthusiasm through my actions. And I was actually really inspired by a creator back in the day. Some of you may know her. She goes by the name Misha Crossing. And I was really inspired by them, particularly for the way that they approached gaming and the way that they let themselves grow as a person. And then even more recent vulnerability. I've always looked up to Misha and in the past communicated, and I genuinely hope that she's doing amazing as she's taken more time away from content creation. But anyway, I want to see this become something that people actually instill in their practices. A lot of the problem, though, comes from the fact that the more you try to put intent behind your content and the more mindful you try to be, you have to understand what that actually means to you and make that very clear to your community. Because your mindfulness and your intent might be, I'm going to play these particular games because they are the type of content that I want to create, and that to me is setting intent, versus someone who is being very deliberate in, I'm going to play this game because it is ethically sound, because it is an indie dev who is doing good work. I am going to remove myself from the games that I feel are going against the morals that I have. Myself, for example, I don't play Disney Dreamlight Valley, and I don't encourage the playing of Disney Dreamlight Valley. I have removed myself entirely from engaging in Disney related anything. And again, I'm not saying that you have to do that. I'm just saying, as an example of intent, intent can mean very different things to different people. Mindfulness can be very different things for different people. Mindfulness can mean, for me, mindfulness means being aware of the fact that I am not alone when creating content, that what I say and what I do affects multiple people, being mindful that someone might be going through something that I could never comprehend, or that I am going through something that others could not comprehend. And their reactions and their actions to things are not against me. They're not fighting me. It's that they don't know, much like I may not know, and nothing is done to hurt on purpose. So being mindful of that, and then setting a lot of intentions in what you're doing. And I think that there might be a miscommunication between what those words do mean versus how people are putting them into gaming. Because I am excited for this potential uplift and uptick of these types of creators, especially with on Twitch, there's a very new popular category called co-working. It's where you sit and do your work or your chores or read a book, or basically body doubling. If you've ever heard of that, where you do something next to someone else to sort of hold you accountable, but at the same time not make you, help you not feel alone, is a category on Twitch that's becoming very popular. It just recently got its own category. And a lot of streamers are falling to that category as a thing that they might potentially succeed in. And that is an example of doing something without intent. And I want streamers and I want content creators to do things with intent. I want to see more of this. I really want to see less fads and more of the actual person, because after a while, even with some of my friends, I notice over time, you lose who the person was, and you start to realize that they're becoming entirely a content creator. That's their entire personality now, and everything is content, and there is no life outside of that. And it's so scary because we all need something for ourselves. And part of being mindful, in my opinion, is making sure that you have those things for yourself, making sure that if gaming is really your hobby, that you have games that are just for you. If reading books and reviewing them is content for you, having books that are just for you. I think it's so important to have a portion of what you do as content be something that you enjoy solo, because in my opinion, I think if you don't enjoy the thing that you're creating content out of when it's not content, you probably don't actually enjoy it as much as you think that you do. And I think that that's where a lot of burnout comes from, because you're forcing yourself to participate in something when in reality you're not finding any joy in it. I'll be honest, I've now lost my entire train of thought. I had to pause to go deal with something, and I do not remember where I was. Actually, there may be some irony in the fact that I am doing this podcast about intent and mindfulness when I did not prepare any type of script. But I think that if I did start writing script for these, they would be not at all what I want them to be. And honestly, by having that revelation, I'm putting that intent in there to recognize that this is a lot of rambling, and every episode will probably be a lot of rambling, but it's done intentionally. So, hey, maybe not so ironic after all. I also want to take a minute to point out the difference between mindfulness and being mindful. And not everyone has to agree with me on this, but mindfulness is actually a meditative practice. I believe it originated in Buddhism, and it's actually the practice of meditating to allow yourself to be fully engulfed in the current moment, forgetting about anything else that's happening, anything you have to do, anything that is required of you and living in the exact moment in which you are currently present. And then being mindful is so much more than that and so different from that. You can definitely overlap the two, but being mindful can be anything from being aware to being sympathetic to being empathetic. Being mindful is, oh, if someone's walking behind me, should I hold the door? Being mindful is when you're turning in a aisle of the grocery store, do you look to the left and right like you would when crossing a street? Because if someone is coming up in a blind spot, then I should probably come up with in a spot you can't see. I shouldn't use blind spot. Let's say they're coming up on a spot you can't see around the corner, right? And if you're just hammering through speed walking down those aisles to get what you want and you don't take a moment to be mindful and aware of the situation around you, you are going to collide with that person. When in reality, if you'd just taken a second to slow down at the end of that aisle, take a look, you could avoid that instance. And I'm not saying mindfulness and being mindful don't overlap, but there's definitely a difference in the words. And I think that might help some people understand a little bit better what you as a creator might want to accomplish, or as a watcher, a consumer of content, what they might mean when they say those words. Because again, if it becomes a fad, if it becomes a buzzword, if it becomes something that people say but don't actually understand the meaning of, or don't create a meaning for themselves, don't honestly and openly talk about what it means to them, it could create some future boundaries and issues, I think, for sure. Which comes back to critical thinking. Something that I really, really push everyone to have and work on is not just assuming a phrase means one thing. Like, look at the context of it, look at the nuance of it, look for other options, answers. If a streamer says, gosh, I have no example for this. If a content creator randomly posts a one line phrase, why did he have to act like that? There's a thousand assumptions that can be made from that. And critical thinking allows us to go, okay, did something bad happen? Is there any context to this? Should I engage with this? Is it for engagement? Is it engagement bait? There's so many different things that as a consumer of content and as a consumer of media, a community member, that we should be aware of on the other side of content creation when it comes to the creators that we put our faith in, put our trust in. And as content creators, part of being mindful is being aware of that. Am I accidentally creating engagement bait? Am I creating engagement bait intentionally? What is the repercussion of that? I think one of my least favorite things I have seen creators do, when I was back on Twitter, which is now X, I completely deleted my tweets. Actually, like right as I was recording this, I was working to delete them. They will tweet things that are so absurd that no one could possibly believe them, right? It could be a streamer that you have trusted their whole career. They've always been the same moral standing as you, stand-up person. And all of a sudden they tweet something that is completely opposite to that. And I'm not going to make comments like that because I hate them so much. But I'm talking about like that your whole life you think that they are standing for human rights, and then they make a tweet that says the exact opposite in capital letters with a bunch of emojis, and we're supposed to understand that that's not real, that that's sarcasm, that that's satire. But not everyone has that ability, and that's not always on them to have that. Yes, we need to use critical thinking, but imagine being a person who assumes that you're always being genuine, that has a good heart, that believes you, that trusts you as a person. They've put their trust in you, and now you have potentially shattered it because, yeah, oh, it's a funny fake tweet. Oh, it didn't mean anything. Like, oh, it's obviously fake. One, even if it is obviously fake to every single one of your followers that has the same mindset as you and the same moral beliefs as you, the people that are opposite to that, the people that voted for the giant orange absolute piece of shit, they don't have that skill. Proven time and time again. They might see that and think you're fucking telling the truth, that you now agree with them and you're giving them tinder for their fire. So that needs to be considered if you are going to be someone that wants to put intent into things. If you want to be a mindful creator, that what you think is funny may not translate as funny. And I'm not saying that you're making all these mistakes. And again, this is me rambling, my opinions. I'm going to say this over and over again until I become confident enough that I don't have to say this. But if you're going to want to become a mindful creator, someone who puts intent into their content, I'm going to do my best to give you examples of how you can do that from what I have learned over the last 4 years of working towards being a low sensory, soft and tender content creator, and 7 years of trying to be a mindful content creator. Because I wasn't always. I did my best, but I learn every day. I might learn from you in the comments below as you're listening to this and coming up with ideas or feedback on what I'm saying. And I honestly love the concept of that. I love the idea that we can use this as a way to grow together. So please do that. I want your opinions. I want to hear what you have to say. And if you do, I encourage you to write out the emotional intent behind your message. You know, I'm writing this with joy and agreement. I'm writing this with constructive criticism in mind. Those things are really important, in my opinion, when you are having nuanced conversations like this. Let's go over some ways that I personally have put more intent and been more mindful in creating content, so that if you wish to implement them in your content or even in your daily life, you can do that. I'm going to start by saying mindfulness and video games kind of don't really go hand in hand. And a lot of the times when you start to work on self-reflection, putting more intent into things and being mindful in general, you'll start to potentially question, how am I going to mix those two things together? When video games have always been something that is either used for escapism or seen as kind of a time sink. For creators, it's a little bit different because it is our job. So there's a, in quotation marks, reason behind it. But I want to just emphasize that video games are not a waste of time. And laziness is not even a real thing. It's a construct. We can talk about that another time. So if video games bring you joy and add to your life, which is my first tip, is I'm going into this is going to make sense for my first piece of advice. If a video game is adding quality to your life, then it is worth it. If it is neutral, if it is not taking anything from your life, but it is not adding anything to your life, you could probably let it go, but maybe it's doing really well for work. You're only going to play it for a little while. You are doing that with intent. I see no problem with that. Then there are the games that are negatively impacting your life. And this can be a game you love. If you are absolutely obsessed with Final Fantasy 14, right? All your time is going into it. You are going to bed late because you're playing it. You are missing meals because you're playing it. You are getting into arguments with people over what's the correct lore or what's the correct way to go about a storyline. Just because you love something does not mean that it is good for you. And that probably hits harder and more at home in a lot of different ways. But let's remember that in this particular situation, we are talking about video games and gaming. So when you want to be more mindful with your gaming, think about that. When you are playing a game and you are experiencing it for the first time or the second, whatever, is it adding something to your life? Is it helping you learn? Is it giving you a new perspective? Are you taking the time to let it teach you? Or is it simply something that you're not enjoying? Because if you're not enjoying it, or it's making you have really gross feelings for whatever reason, even if you can't justify them, then it's not a game you should be playing. It's not a game that you should be playing for other people, especially because it will have an effect on your emotions. And that's not being mindful. You're being mindful of your own feelings and how a game is making you feel and what a game is doing for your life around you. And that's really important. Then there's being mindful within the game. And this leads back to mindfulness, that sort of meditative state of being aware of the things around you. When you're playing a game, are you really being aware of the game, of the landscapes, of the storyline, of each character, and the intent behind the way that their clothing is designed for where they are located in the world, or how a puzzle was created to be solved multiple ways so that no one ever felt stuck, so that frustration wasn't something this game had as a feeling it gave you? Was the game created with intent? When you look around in the world that you're playing in, or you look at the way that a puzzle was created, does it make sense? Does it feel like someone made this with joy, with passion? Or is it something that just maybe hit the market at the right time, so to speak? And honestly, by allowing yourself to really be present in the game that you're playing, you're probably going to find yourself enjoying more games because of this, because you're allowing yourself to step back and not rush through a storyline. Maybe even starting to think how a character would react. How would my character work in this world? And it can be anything as complicated as Baldur's Gate 3, where you're supposed to roleplay a character or to some extent roleplay a character, all the way down to Pokemon Arceus, where you can think of, if I were stuck back in time, how would I act? How would I behave? Or there's so many ways that you can really learn to love a game. And by allowing yourself to be mindful of the game and what's in it, what's a part of becoming a part of the game, you might be thinking, well, this is just role play. This is just becoming the character you're playing. And honestly, partially it is, because it's going to allow you to slow down. I remember when I did my Breath of the Wild run, I did no fast travel, and I required myself to let Link stop and rest at least every other day, and tried to give him proper meals. And it really allowed me to explore the game in a way I don't think I would have otherwise. It allowed me to emphasize the amount of work in gathering the materials to constantly have that food available to me, and the amount of time that was being lost during a world devastation because Link, though the hero of time, still needs his beauty sleep. Something else with mindful gaming, specifically when talking about content creators, is being mindful and putting intent behind the game you are choosing to play. I'm specifically talking about ethical choices, knowing who's making the game, the history of the company making the game, who's working on the game. And this actually falls a lot into the category of harm reduction, which is something that I want to talk about, but I'm going to talk about it in another podcast. And honestly, there's an interconnectivity around all the things that I'm talking about. And that's bound to happen if you really think about it. Everything is interconnected, but I want to make sure that these are digestible podcasts and not overwhelming, not just for you, but for me as well. But being aware of the game that you're playing and what the game has inside of it, as well as who the people are that made it, is so important, because you're being mindful of your intent and you are making sure that what you are showcasing to your community. And if you are not a content creator and you are just a gamer, in quotation marks, just a gamer, you're going to talk to your friends about it. You're going to encourage your favorite creators to play the games that you love because you want to see them enjoy it just the same. So it's important that we support good people. And no, we can't know everything about everyone all the time. And someone that we think is good might turn out to be not so great. That happens. And it's never your fault. You did nothing wrong. If you went into consuming something, be it video game or otherwise, and absolutely fell in love with it, and then something is found out much later, that's not on you. You are not a bad person because you didn't know or because you love it. What's important is that you don't continue to support it in an outward way. It's kind of like I'm going to do Stardew Valley, for example, and this might shock some of you. But Stardew Valley has had a falling out with some cozy gamers because they, and I mean Concerned Ape when I say this, has not added pronouns into the game, has not even commented on why we cannot choose a gender neutral pronoun. Why, when we pick the masculine body, do we have to be addressed as a young lad by George? Why do we pick the feminine body? We have to be addressed as the daughter. And because of this backlash, at first it was just, we want to encourage you to add it. But after that, a lot of hate started coming towards cozy gamers, friends of mine even. And Concerned Ape said nothing about it. I'm using this example because I don't expect people to stop playing Stardew Valley. I still love Stardew Valley. But what I'm not going to do is encourage the purchase of merchandise around Stardew Valley. I'm not going to put money in the pocket of someone who didn't value the lives of those that I love enough to say something. And people are, before we get into this and that becomes a whole thing, I don't want to hear anything about, well, he's not on social media very much. He wouldn't know. People know. He knows. People talk to him in person at concerts. We're not getting into that. That's a whole nother situation. That is not what this is about. But it is a great example of being mindful around the content that you are consuming and that you are showcasing to those around you. Having the knowledge of what's happened with the games that you are playing so that when asked about it, you can talk about it. To me, that is being mindful because you are being aware of how this will affect everyone else around you. And you might get to this point and think, okay, this is too much for me. I'm overworked. I'm overstimulated. Hey, this is your friendly reminder that you're allowed to pause these whenever you need to. Please take a minute to take a breath and let your body move a little bit if you need it. Shake your hands out, unclench your shoulders, your jaw, whatever it is that you're currently doing. If you're driving and listening, please pay attention to the road. Maybe turn the podcast off and listen a little bit later. Maybe on a walk or in the bathtub. Something a little less dangerous. Now, back to mindfulness. I mean, that alone is an example of being mindful. That's a great actual tip for content creators as well, is being mindful of the time you're spending and how you're spending that time. Is your community taking care of themselves? No, it's not your responsibility. They are grown adults. They should be able to take care of themselves. But everybody needs help now and then. And people can get hyper-focused. So simple things like reminding them if they had to go to the bathroom, to run to the washroom, or giving yourself a break as well. Letting yourself have a moment to recenter, going on a even just 2-minute break or 30-second break and just saying, okay, I'm going to be right back. Everybody take a breath, run and get water, grab something to eat. You're not going to miss anything. I'm going to walk away as well. Engage them with what you're doing, and you can be mindful in that way. Now, some of this might maybe not fall into the mindfulness category for you as a person, and that's totally fine. There's very little mindfulness in gaming is still relatively very new, and it actually hit a sort of mini fad about 2 years ago. And that was when we were coming out of the initial shock and seclusion of COVID, which I will make very clear now. My stance is COVID is not over. There is very much a pandemic. Please wear your masks and get vaccinated. See, I have a speech impediment, and when I record these, I don't edit them out or retake it. So you're really getting the raw situation here. Please get vaccinated, wear your masks, and protect those that have a much harder time than yourself, okay? Getting back to mindfulness. That's mindfulness in itself. Honestly, to me, mindfulness just means sympathy, empathy, awareness of those around you, and consideration for those around you. And maybe being mindful and mindfulness to you simply means allowing yourself to follow the meditative teachings and just be aware of your surroundings. Engage in the beauty of everyday little things and putting that into video gaming by allowing yourself to get lost in the world of a video game and look at the intent behind the characters. And that's totally fine. I just think that when it comes to content creation, if you are going to use a word to describe your content, then there should be an understanding of what it means to describe your content as that. You can play a game mindfully, you can be a mindful gamer, but being a mindful content creator and creating mindful gaming content is very different. It has to encompass everything you do, not just the way that you play the game. That's my opinion, that's my take on it. And this video is getting way too long, so I'm going to end on that note. Remember that mindfulness and mindful gaming as a content creator, all encompassing. As an individual gaming, take what you want from this conversation. And honestly, this conversation will probably come back again in another episode because I think that I'll have more thoughts and more advice as I discover how I'm creating mindful gaming and becoming a mindful creator. And that word may end up being too much of a buzzword for me, honestly. I never really felt like I was a cozy gamer either because it just feels like a buzzword to me. That's why I've always said I create soft and tender content because that's what I feel like I do create. And I'm proud of that. Thank you so much for listening to my ramblings. And if you found it helpful or you enjoyed listening, please don't forget to give the video a thumbs up. It does actually really help me out. And subscribe if you feel like it. I'm going to try to do these pretty frequently or as much as I have opinions. And we all know that I have a lot of them. But most importantly, I hope that you have a very magical day.